Rubio, this is the statement, quote, Secretary Rubio has a personal relationship with President Bukele and senior officials in the El Salvadorian government that dates back over a decade to the Secretary's service on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Based on this deep experience with El Salvador and the Secretary's familiarity with political and diplomatic sensitivities in that country, he is personally handling discussions with the government of El Salvador regarding the persons subject to the court order detained in El Salvador. Secretary Rubio has read and understands this court's order and wants to assure this court that he is committed to making prompt and diligent efforts on behalf of the United States to comply with the order. I mean, it's interesting, Harry, because you and I both know, I'm not sure if there's a Secretary of State exception to hearsay, but you look at it, it's the most defective declaration imaginable. But if you take away the rules of evidence and hearsay, who knows, maybe it's an admission against self-interest. I could probably come up with some exception to the hearsay doctrine based on that. Maybe not the way they envision. But we're seeing this also in a case where an individual from Mexico was disappeared back to Mexico, who fled Mexico because he was raped in Mexico as a gay man, and then sent to Guatemala, where he was being raped also and was in hiding in Guatemala because there was a forged statement from him that nobody would actually vouch for in the Trump regime, that he didn't fear going back to Mexico when he said he feared for it. And there we saw the government making a similar statement that we're working hard with the Guatemalan government. And I think we're going to see the same thing in Abrego Garcia and others. So what do you think's going on here, Harry? And is this kind of an effort to protect some of these lawyers who are now having their licenses on the line?
Right. I mean, in part, you're sure right about the lawyers. They've been coming forward with nothing. I can't tell you anything. The one guy who said something accurate, Bondi personally dismissed thereafter, 15-year veteran of the department, but they were left with nothing. So there does seem to have been some kind of internal negotiations within the department. And I think it probably started just as you say, guys, you can't do this to me, says the Office of Immigration Litigation lawyer who comes forward. But still, there stands to date. Both these cases you just talked about, you have violations by the administration. These are two of the four that really were sent there by mistake. The one came as a minor and was subject to an order not to deport, at least for now. The other, as you say, the U.S. said he doesn't mind if he goes to Mexico. And then when the judge said, okay, can you explain who said that? They were like, I don't know. We don't have anybody. Maybe we made it up. And the judge was furious. So you had both, judges in that very aggressive posture in both instances. But to date, the administration's likely response would have been to meet force with double force. And now, for the first guy you mentioned, they say, we are endeavoring to charter a plane. How hard can that be to charter a plane? It's been a few days, but I mean, I don't see what move they have to say we can't charter the plane. I mean, it seems they've gone pretty far toward committing themselves to the very thing they've so steadfastly refused to do, namely capitulating, complying, bringing the people back to at least get due process. Then they can argue, okay, we've given him due process and now we can deport him. It depends what happens. And this Rubio thing I thought was equally remarkable. So he comes forward and says, I'm handling it personally. Now, on the one hand, it seems to suggest, what a tough assignment, and we need Super Mario to come on in there and really be able to delicately do the mission impossible with President Bukele. Come on. We know the situation down there. We know Bukele's need to be in good with the administration. We know who's paying the bill. This cannot be much harder than picking up the phone and saying, oh, here's a few, President, to please send back right away. And after he has said this much, is Rubio really going to come forward and say, gosh, I tried so hard, Your Honor, and I just couldn't do it. So sorry. And now, we've tried to facilitate. So we complied with your order. In other words, they've now gone in 3 cases, and they've done something similar in the Second Circuit as well in response to a pretty pissed off court's series of questions. Halfway toward the very outcome they had sworn they wouldn't do, which is trying to bring them back and listening, capitulating to courts. I think part of that is about the impossible position for the lawyers, but part of it's about just getting their head handed to them. You know, they lost 26 of 27 cases in May, and they're losing, you know, left and right. And I think someone maybe on the other, what passes as a dove in this administration is against Stephen Miller, saying, writing's on the wall. We got to do something, guys. We're not going to be able to hang in there. But the sort of in the overall context of what you and I have been following for a couple months now, Ben, I think it's only half measures, but still it's in the direction of saying, you win courts, we'll try to bring them back. And, you know, at least for a couple of them, if they come back now and say, oops, couldn't do it, it's not going to be credible at all.
There's no doubt about it. And I think this is why you're starting to see this language, though, from Stephen Miller and Trump about this suspension of habeas corpus, and the language that you and I talked about this 2 weeks when Miller first talked about very cavalierly, we're going to suspend habeas corpus.
Right.
And then we found out that the Homeland Security Secretary said habeas corpus gives the president the right to do whatever he wants. It's like, I'm not sure you really read constitutional law or constitutional law class. But you notice what Stephen Miller is saying is, if the courts don't, and he does it in that Stephen Miller face, if the courts don't do what we say that they need to do, we will do a surgical habeas corpus suspension that focuses on the migrants. They are not subject to our so we're going to focus on them. And then we also see Donald Trump lashing out against the Federalist Society and Trump appointing.
Whoa, what about that, huh? Yeah.
And it all kind of doesn't at all. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but they know they're losing from these Trump appointed judges. Yeah. So you have this tension. Actual lawyers who have to practice in a court of law. It reminds me of when Mike Lindell went into the courtroom in his defamation case. His lawyers were like, yeah, we have no evidence that's actually going to prove that the election from 2020 was stolen. We just think that Mike Lindell's a crazy person and his words don't have any meaning. So what they say in the court versus what they post on social media is very, very different. I'll let you have the last word here.
Yeah, but well, that's it. But nevertheless, they had been, you're right. They'd been, one of the problems that the lawyers had when they go to court is judges read newspapers or at least go online, and they'd heard these outrageous kind of contemptuous statements about the courts, the Constitution, and the rule of law. So that's gotten them in trouble. But just in general, this has been the sort of big face off. My general view has come to be, Ben, that man, oh man, he's wreaking havoc in general with government. But as long as the courts hold, and especially here on the Constitution, the rule of law, habeas corpus, that's the number one thing we can look to do. And I can't, it's I think a little premature to say that the Trump administration has thrown in the towel. But at a minimum, they've read the writing on the wall. Is that a mixed metaphor? Apologize if it is. And they are, I think they are perceptibly less dogmatic, less confrontational. And at least in some of these cases, they are playing ball. And it only takes one, right? If they, if they can't charter a plane, I don't want to be the lawyer in court who's explaining that to the judge. But they bring one person home, and it undermines their whole dogmatic effort to say, "Shut up, courts! This has nothing to do with you. You're out of it." The rule of law goes across the board to everyone, and they recognize it in one case. They're going to have to recognize it in others, and will it be plausible to actually say, oh, we tried our hardest, but we couldn't get it done? You now also have judges more and more being emboldened in ways they would not have done when I was at the Department of Justice, to basically say, you guys are full of it and stop, cut the crap and let's